This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today and I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. Thousands of flights are cancelled around the world as the Omicron variant continues to spread. Vaccination centres in the UK remain open on Christmas Day to encourage booster jabs. And a space telescope 100 times more powerful than the Hubble is ready for liftoff in French Guiana. Welcome to the program. Now, the World Health Organization says the Omicron variant of the coronavirus has been detected in 110 countries and regions. It added the variant is getting more and more prominent and can spread significantly faster than Delta. Several countries are reporting record high numbers. On Friday, the UK confirmed over 120,000 new cases. Italy declared a second successive record tally on Friday with new cases creeping past 50,000. Ireland too is under pressure. Of its 11,000 new cases, nearly three-quarters are Omicron. In Asia, Japan has detected its first community transmission of the new variant. The surge has taken its toll on international travel on arguably the biggest holiday weekend of the year. Thousands of flights have been cancelled, more than 2,300 on Friday, Christmas Eve, and over 1,000 either cancelled or rescheduled for Christmas Day. In the US, two of the biggest airlines grounded hundreds of flights due to staff shortages. Well, as the world celebrates the festive season, millions around the world are expected to travel in order to spend the holiday with family and friends. But with a dramatic surge in COVID-19 infections in many countries attributed to the Omicron variant, many are worried how they'll do that safely. The World Health Organization has published advice on how people can protect themselves and those around them during the festive period. Here is CGTN's Robert Nagila with that report.
The first piece of advice is get vaccinated as soon as it's your turn, especially for those with a higher risk of infection. WHO says approved COVID-19 vaccines provide a higher degree of protection against serious illness or death. Next, wear a mask, as they help to stop the spread of the virus or infection. However, for a mask to be as effective as possible, it must cover your nose, mouth, and chin. Thirdly, maintain physical distancing of at least 1 meter from other people, even if they don't appear to be sick. And try to be part of smaller gatherings in spaces that allow you to keep physical distancing. Fourth, cover coughs and sneezes with a bent elbow or tissue when you cough or sneeze. And dispose of the used tissue immediately in a closed bin and wash your hands. Number 5, keep your hands clean frequently with soap and water or alcohol-based hand rub. This helps eliminate germs that may be on your hands, including viruses. 6, meet outside or where there's increased ventilation. This is because COVID-19 is more easily transmitted in crowded or poorly ventilated spaces. To make your environment as safe as possible this season, avoid the 3 C's. These are spaces that are closed, crowded, or involve close contact. And finally, know the symptoms of COVID-19 and stay home if you're sick. The most common symptoms are fever, dry cough, and fatigue, while other symptoms that are less common include loss of taste or smell, nasal congestion, sore throat, headache, muscle or joint pain, among others.
Well, let's get more on the situation around the world as we celebrate Christmas Day. We're now joined by CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa here in Nairobi, as well as Deji Bademosi, who joins us from Lagos, Nigeria. Wilkista, I'll begin with you first. How are people in Kenya celebrating Christmas as the government's new COVID-19 vaccine rule is implemented?
Well, thank you, Mahia. I will say that it's a bit of an unusual Christmas this year, given the fact that the country and indeed the rest of the world is battling the COVID-19 pandemic. Here in Nairobi and also in parts of Kenya, we have seen Kenyans really trying to stick to the traditions from before while also taking precautions. In the last few days, we have seen what we usually call the mass exodus, people traveling to different destinations, a number of them going back to their ancestral homes, while others went to different holiday destinations such as the coast and the Masai Mara. However, this year it is also, just because of the pandemic, they're taking different precautions. We have seen a number of them trying to get tested before they go up country because of interacting with their relatives, and also the fact that some of those they are going to interact with are elderly and also at risk, would be at risk. But we are also seeing quite a number of them just choosing to remain in the city, choosing to stay away from large gatherings in order to safeguard themselves and to also safeguard their families. And this now comes just a few days after the government announced the COVID-19 vaccine mandate. What this basically means is that the Ministry of Health has said that members of the public will need to show proof of vaccination in order to access public spaces. And this includes spaces such as restaurants and bars and hotels, but it also means places such as airports so that they can board planes, as well as just in order to access government services in hospitals and in other government offices. And as recently as yesterday evening, we could see quite a number of Kenyans flocking vaccination centers, trying to get their vaccine so that they could then be able to access these areas without any inconveniences and without being turned away or being barred. So we are seeing that happening, and we are also seeing that this year it seems that Christmas is a bit of a low-key event, not as festive as it usually is across the country. And of course this is because of the pandemic and also because of the economic situation in the country, given that a number of sectors have taken an economic hit because of the events of the last 2 years or so. However, regardless of all the challenges, we are seeing Kenyans just trying to celebrate the day in their own little way, trying to find a little joy, and that is the meaning of the season, Mahia.
Indeed, muted celebrations across the country during a traditionally busy time. Deji, I'll come to you very briefly. What about Nigeria? What's the Christmas mood like in the country? And what would you say is the impact of COVID on these celebrations there?
Well, Mahia, what I can tell you is that Christmas this year will be close to normal when compared to that of last year. For a start, for instance, hotels are open. We're having close to large gatherings, even though the government is discouraging it, saying people should avoid large gatherings. But come on, music artists are holding concerts. We never had that last year. Churches are, well, at least they're holding their services and getting almost filled up. We never had that last year. So it's close to normal Christmas, and the celebration actually started even before now. As I said, music artists are holding mega concerts, if you like, but the government is also encouraging people to observe social distancing, to avoid large gathering and all of that. What I can tell you is that enforcement is the issue. So the government puts out these guidelines, but it is not enforcing it. And at some point, the government said it was going to come up with a system where those who would be attending, say, parties and social gatherings will be required to show their COVID-19 vaccination card. But then that has been very difficult to enforce. So Christmas this year is going to be close to normal. The only challenge, of course, is economic that Wilkis has talked about. Of course, you know, the economy is not doing very well in Nigeria, so there's no doubt at all that it will dampen the celebration a bit. But I can tell you, Mahia, the Christmas this year is definitely better than what we had last year. There was no Christmas celebration at all, but this year people are celebrating. I can tell you that.
All right, Deji, thank you very much for that. From Nairobi, CGTN's Wilkis Nyabwa, and from Lagos, Nigeria, Deji Badimosi, speaking to us live on the program. Moving further afield, Omicron has seen a surge in cases in London this past week. Official data suggests around 1 in 10 Londoners are likely to contract COVID by the end of this week. Michael Voss has more.
The government has announced that some vaccination centres will continue working on Christmas Day. Giving third booster jabs has become the UK's major strategy to ease pressure on the health service. In his Christmas address to the nation, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said a vaccination would be a good Christmas present.
And I hope I can be forgiven for taking pride in the immense spirit of neighbourliness that the people of this country have shown. Getting jabbed, not just for themselves, for ourselves, but for friends and family and everyone we meet. And that, after all, is the teaching of Jesus Christ, whose birth is at the heart of this enormous festival, that we should love our neighbours as we love ourselves.
Yet more evidence is emerging that Omicron is less severe than the Delta COVID variant. This latest study is by the UK Health Security Agency, which backs up other recent findings. It found that patients with Omicron are between 50 to 70% less likely to need hospitalisation. But Omicron is so much more contagious that hospital numbers may actually increase. London streets are much quieter than normal. Many people shopped online this year, while restaurants and clubs reported large numbers of cancellations. The government has announced more than $1 billion to help struggling businesses, though the full economic impact of Omicron has yet to be determined. Michael Voss, CGTN, London.
And the James Webb Space Telescope, designed by NASA, is set for launch in 3 hours from the European Space Agency's launch base in French Guiana. The revolutionary $9 billion infrared telescope is about 100 times more sensitive than its predecessor, Hubble. It will be able to observe objects at greater distances and thus farther back in time. Astronomers say it will bring into view a glimpse of the cosmos never previously seen, dating to just 100 million years after the Big Bang. Its instruments make it ideal to search for evidence of potentially life-supporting atmospheres. Over the coming month, the Webb telescope will coast to its destination in solar orbit, roughly 1 million miles from Earth. And that's it from this edition of The World Today. CGTN's Adel Mahroui in Cairo, Girum Chala in Addis Ababa, as well as Angelo Coppola in Johannesburg are all standing by to bring you some of the top stories making headlines across Africa. That's coming up next on Africa Live. Do stay with us.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Western powers say Libya's interim government still valid. Ethiopia says the military won't cross into Tigray for now. And Nigerian President Buhari says the country is in the final stage of tackling insurgency. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. Merry Christmas to you wherever you're tuning in. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour, in business, Tunisia to fight tax evasion and raise taxes as well as social allowances. And in sports, South Africa expect to make the most of their home advantage against India at Centurion. Welcome to the program. Now, 5 Western nations say that they will continue to recognize Libya's interim government following a delay of the country's presidential election. Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and the United States are urging authorities to quickly set a new date for the exercise. Earlier this week, Libya's parliament said that after consultations, they deemed it impossible to hold the polls on the set date. The Electoral Commission proposed moving the election by a month. However, there is no wider agreement on the suggestion. Disputes over election rules and the eligibility of some candidates contributed to the delay. The vote was part of a United Nations-backed initiative aimed at ending almost a decade of unrest in Libya. Well, let's get more on that story now. We're now joined by CGTN's Adel Mahroui, who is in Cairo for the latest. Adel, Western powers have said that they would continue to recognize Libya's interim government after its presidential election was delayed. Just who are these Western powers and how are the leaders in Libya reacting to this statement?
As you've briefly mentioned, there are 4 of them are the top European players interested in the Libyan file, so Britain, Germany, France and Italy, along with the United States. And these 5 countries have been for months actually quite consistent in releasing joint statements, specifically through their ambassadors in Libya, about any stance or any position in going on in Libya in the past months. So therefore, it's a common stance and it's a solidification of the stance they have together that they want to support Libyans to cross these turbulences that are ongoing and reach the elections as soon as possible. And also they have more or less threatened those who would stand against the election process or those who would attempt to tamper with the voting boxes, the ballots or the results will be held accountable no matter how later on they are chased or they are held in custody. So this is a general stance from the Western powers. Libya has to go to the ballots as soon as possible, and anyone who stands in the way, they will hold him accountable and try to make him responsible and get whatever sanctions necessary for them if they hinder the electoral process.
Right, and Adel, Libyans are celebrating their 70th independence anniversary. What's the mood like there, and what do they think of the delayed elections?
So the December 24th date was not selected haphazardly. This is as you said, the national day for Libya. And Friday was the 70th and therefore should have been a new era for the 10 years long conflict with holding elections and electing new government. But now as the celebrations still proceed without having a new elected president or government, Libyans are concerned about the future. We know for sure that most of the Libyans, that's from polls and from online engagement, most of Libyans want to see this conflict end as soon as possible. The means to which doesn't necessarily is not necessarily the same for all Libyan factions. Some still believe that the elections should go on as soon as possible and that should be a salvation for them. Others believe that this might be the time to rethink about the political process, maybe hold constitutional elections and a referendum first, which could ease up the rest of it. In any case, no matter what track Libyans are going to take, and that will be clear once the parliament announce a new pass for the elections this Monday after they convene. Whatever this track is, Libyans want to make sure that this track is solid, there are no appeals against it, and it cannot be hindered. And therefore, they can finally put an end to this decade-long conflict.
All right, Adel, thank you very much for speaking to us on Africa Live. CGTN's Adel Mahroui in Cairo there. Well, we're staying with Libya. The country has seen alarming movement of militia groups in recent days. Many had hoped the December the 24th election would finally bring an elected leader who would have the authority to deal with their threats. Now, with the vote postponed, the uncontrolled armed groups remain the country's biggest challenge in restoring calm. Here now is CGTN's Adel Mahroui with more.
The security force in the Libyan capital, Tripoli, is made up of many armed groups that are theoretically under the authority of the Defense and Interior Ministries. However, almost all these groups have their own commander who mobilizes his forces based on political or financial interests.
Unfortunately, up until now, there is no one entity or person that controls these armed groups. Neither the cabinet nor the presidency council has taken any steps to unify these forces. Sometimes these groups find themselves united against one goal, as they stood against the attacks Haftar led to seize Tripoli.
Recently, militants stormed the cabinet and the presidency council's offices after the latter sacked their leader from a military post. Earlier, more groups paralyzed the Libyan capital with their forces when Foreign Minister Najla El-Mangoush demanded they get unarmed. Analysts fear that the delay in the presidential election could further empower these local militias, putting Libya's future in jeopardy.
Delaying the election is a catastrophe. It is a waste for the rights of the citizens who aspired stability. It is a crime against Libya itself as an independent state. Every day without an election is a big harm because it will greatly affect the evacuation of mercenaries, foreign fighters, and will not let the local militia put down their guns.
Many Western politicians, though, do not see these armed groups as a major threat.
All of these groups announced that they endorse the election process and that they will be part of the securing forces for all poll stations. These elections didn't happen because of security issues. We rather have a bigger threat of political failure because the Eastern Parliament tailored election laws so it would allow some candidates they prefer to run and ban others they don't like.
After days of talks with Libyan factions, the UN support mission in Libya says it witnessed a shift from the discourse of conflict to peaceful dialogue among Libyan factions. But without real control over the huge number of militias and the arms they lay their hands on, there are no guarantees that Libya can sustain the turbulences caused by the delay of the elections. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Now, to Ethiopia's ongoing conflict, the government says its troops will stay in 2 liberated regions and not cross into the conflict zone of Tigray in the north. But it also says necessary measures will be in place to make sure the Tigrayan rebels do not present a threat. Humanitarian sources said airstrikes hit a key power station in Tigray's capital, Mekelle, on Wednesday. Power across the city has been off since. The government hasn't made any comment on the incident. The federal government and the rebels have been at war for over a year. Well, CGTN's Girum Chala is in Addis Ababa and joins us live with more. Girum, what is the latest on the situation in Tigray?
Well, as you've said, Maya, in the Tigray regional state, this situation can be called as a humanitarian challenge, and also the complaints that they've been repeatedly making when it comes to airstrikes or drone strikes by the government, which the government, by the way, did not say anything officially about. We know here and there that there are continued engagements with the TPLF this time around. May not be on the ground, but then again, airstrikes, the government earlier has said that they will continue as long as they are necessary to prevent any similar attacks that have happened perhaps a year ago, or the invasion, as they say, of Amhara and the Afar regional states. So in general terms, we can say right now that since the Tigray force were taken away out of the Amhara and Afar regional states, there is no active engagement to talk about seriously. Of course, there are reports of small fightings happening, but then again, since the decision of the government not to advance to the Tigray regional state, then there is no active war that can be reported, although airstrikes and drone strikes are being reported here and there, which the government officially, as I said earlier, did not say anything about.
And Girum, the government also says that it will be holding back its army from entering the Tigray region. What does this mean then?
Well, Maya, you must understand that this more than 1 year war is a civil war in the country between members of former regional state, the Tigray regional state, now TPLF force, and the federal government. And the difference has been political most of the time, and tensions have been building for a long time. And now that border was one of the problems between the Tigray regional state and the Amhara regional state, the government decided to keep its gains of withdrawing those forces from the Tigray regional state and Afar regional state as an important gain, but then again decided not to advance. One, humanitarian reasons. Two, not to complicate situations, and many more. But to explain further, let's take a listen to what the Minister of Communication Services has to say.
Now the army is ordered to strongly instill and remain outside of the Tigray region for now. There are several basic reasons for this decision to be made. First, we found it necessary that we take lessons from the last time we entered the Tigray region. Second, we conclude the terrorist group is planning a conspiracy and blame it on the army, so we stay away from the region and not fall victim to that. They are planning to claim genocide. Third, we want to minimize the unfair international pressure against the country. But one must understand that when and if necessary, our army can and will enter the region and accomplish a mission.
Maya, there you have it. The minister was clarifying why the government decided, the Ethiopian National Defense Force decided to remain behind the buffer zones between the Tigray regional state and the Amhara regional state, and also from the Afar side in order to avoid complications and international pressure, as you have heard it. So for now, the good news is this can pave way for any perhaps peace talks that could begin anytime soon, including the government-proposed national dialogue. Back to you.
All right, Girum, thank you very much for speaking to us on Africa Live. CGTN's Girum Chala there in Addis Ababa. Moving on to South Africa, where the country's health authorities have approved both the Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer vaccines for booster shots. This comes as the country deals with a fourth wave of COVID-19 infections driven by the Omicron variant. Angelo Coppola has the story. Well, for more on that, Angelo is live for us in Johannesburg. Angelo?
Hi, well, it's early days now for those who want those booster shots. The frontline health workers, of course, have been getting their booster shots for some time now. The problem is that the vaccination rate here is a little over 40%, and booster shots only apply to people who have been vaccinated. The announcement of those booster shots was literally made 2 days ago, and many people are already on their annual summer holidays and may not be near a familiar vaccination point. Those, of course, wanting that Pfizer vaccine booster will have to wait until the 28th. The booster announcement was made as some parts of the country emerged from that fourth surge of the latest variant. Let's hear more now on those booster shots. The role of approved COVID vaccines and boosters is simply to stimulate the human body and its immune system. It's part of a range of actions taken.
One potential strategy is to keep protection high, and that means that we need to boost the primary vaccine schedule. And effectively what that means is just topping up immunity, if you like, filling the tank, and therefore protecting once again in a stronger way against the COVID-19 infection.
So we do know that if you get the timing right, and we believe we've got the timing right, having studied this now quite extensively, you will get very good immune response generated in most people.
It's imperative that as many people as possible get vaccinated and get the booster shot, and that healthcare workers and especially hospital workers are properly protected.
More vaccination is good. And, you know, it does mean for healthcare workers that we have them on the front line doing what they need to be doing for far more days of the year.
There's no question that vaccination is definitely keeping people out of severe illness and out of hospital. And that's what we wanted to do. So even if you get exposed and you get mild illness and feel a bit lousy for a day or two, well, that's okay. It's not going to kill you. And that's what we want.
South Africa's vaccine rate is still low, at a little over 40%. Vaccine hesitancy remains an issue.
This has been well described to fall into three main categories. People feel complacent. In other words, I am not at risk for COVID-19 and therefore I don't need to do this. Or they lack confidence. I'm not sure this is for me. You know, are there side effects I'm not prepared to risk? And then thirdly, you know, I just can't be bothered. I've got life to live. I've got other things to do. I don't want to, you know, I feel too well to think about going to a vaccine center and getting myself vaccinated.
There's no question that vaccines and boosters do work. It brings down those people who are going into hospitals significantly. It's now a question of getting more people into those vaccine centers. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And Angelo, there has been hesitancy not just in South Africa but also across the continent on vaccination. How are people there reacting to the booster jabs?
Well, look, hesitancy is an issue, and there are many reasons for this, as you've heard. In South Africa, for example, it's estimated that only 10% of people are getting tested. That means 90% of people are wandering around either with the virus or having been exposed to the virus. And many are choosing not to be vaccinated because they're not symptomatic, and they couldn't be bothered, basically. And on getting vaccinated, only 40% of the population in the country are being vaccinated, so it's unlikely to change anytime soon and substantially. The relative mildness of the current vaccine symptoms is adding to that hesitancy. And that booster announcement, of course, will only apply and be acted on by people who've already been vaccinated. And that's the 60% that aren't vaccinated who are the problem there. And that's despite hospital data that's showing that the majority of hospital patients are unvaccinated. In one study, in fact, the Department of Health official I spoke to says that there was only one person who had been vaccinated out of a group of 14 people, and the others were unvaccinated, and they were all in pretty dire straits. So it appears that hesitancy can be linked to high exposure levels or relatively mild symptoms. One doctor I spoke to suggested it could be due to the resilience of the continent's population, with the human body building up those immune systems to deal with a range of viruses without the use of Western medicine. Mahia.
All right, Angelo, thank you very much for that update. Angelo Coppola joining us live there from Johannesburg. Moving on, at least 4 people have died in Zimbabwe after a bus collided with a fuel tanker outside the eastern city of Mutare. Reports indicate that the bus was ferrying passengers from Harare. Officials say the incident happened around 5 p.m. local time. The deceased include 2 people who were on the bus, the tanker driver and a passenger. Well, let's get more on that story now. CGTN's Mahia Mutua is joining us live on the phone from Harare. Farai, what's the latest you can bring us on this bus accident yesterday?
Well, so far the police is still undertaking its investigations into the circumstances that led to that tragic accident. The police spokesperson was quoted in state media today saying that they believe that the bus encroached into oncoming traffic. Apparently the driver was trying to avoid another vehicle in his own lane and then encroached into the lane for oncoming traffic, and that led to this head-on collision with that tanker. And as you quite rightly said, so far, 4 people have been confirmed dead, dozens are injured, and that is the latest information that we have from the police spokesperson at this point in time.
And Farai, obviously an understandably tragic accident on Christmas Eve. How is the rescue and recovery efforts going now?
Well, we know that, apart from the 4 deceased, the number that we've heard so far is that 54 people sustained burns Many of those are quite serious, and they are being treated at the provincial hospital in Mutare, which is in Manicaland province. Those that are extremely serious or require specialized sort of treatment, we expect that they will be ferried to or referred to main hospitals in the capital city, Harare, later today. But at this point, it is those 54 injured, and we understand that the state or severity of those injuries is quite serious.
All right, Farai, thank you very much for those updates. Farai Mokutuya joining us from Harare. Moving on, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari says his country is in its final phase of tackling insurgency. He's been visiting Borno State, the epicenter of an insurgency in the country. Our correspondent Tesem Akende now reports.
The president was in the state to commission projects executed by the state government. And about an hour before his arrival, multiple explosions were launched in communities around the airport in Maiduguri. President Buhari continued with his visit and charged troops keeping the peace there to remain steadfast and defeat adversaries of the state. He said it is a final phase against insurgency and other forms of criminality in the country, insisting the northeast region of the country will be restored to stability. Nigeria has been battling insurgency for over 10 years. In June, the United Nations said the insurgency has claimed over 350,000 lives and displaced over 2 million people. Tassem Akende, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
Well, it's time for us to take a short break here on Africa Live. Here's what's coming up. France and allies condemn the deployment of Russian Wagner mercenaries in Mali. And budding South African designer offers inspiration amid COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome back. Now, 16 European nations have denounced the deployment of foreign troops in the West African state of Mali. The 16 governments say that they are aware of the involvement of Russia in providing support to the deployment of the Wagner Group in Mali. They've called on Russia to revert to constructive actions in the region. The Wagner Group is a Russian paramilitary company. The European states say the move is likely to further deteriorate the security situation in West Africa. Mali has faced a long-running jihadist insurgency, which has killed thousands of civilians. Well, for more on that, we're now joined by David Otto Endley, Director on Security for the Horn of Africa Institute for Peace and Security Governance based in London. David, thank you for joining us. What are your thoughts on the spat between the EU and Russia, which is spilling over to Africa?
Yes, of course. Any keen observer of geopolitics would, tell you that, when it comes to Russia and the West, this is not a new kind of narrative, in terms of, especially when it comes to spheres of common influence. But I think there are four critical points. I think the first point is that, the doctrine of counterinsurgency, or what they call the war on terror, has always demanded that there should be cooperation and collaboration between nation states that have the capacity to fight against a common enemy. I think the second point is that Mali retains the sovereignty to decide on which partnership to engage with, especially when it comes to the war on terror. But also of very great importance is the fact that when you look at the 2013 intervention by France, using Operation Bakken, that has not been a very successful operation. So there is need for Mali to review its partnership. The fourth and most important point, which one has to be very clear, and I have been clear on this point, is that there is no such registered organization as Wagner Group. These are just names that have been used to refer to Russian intervention in different countries. But I think what is clear here is that if we're talking about a bilateral agreement between Russia and Mali, this is down to Malians and no one else.
And David, speaking specifically about Mali, where does this leave the country in terms of its own security?
Of course, it leaves Mali in a very chaotic position, because remember, the European Union has what it calls the Operation Takuba, which is mainly by European Union states. France also has a huge contribution within that coalition. Of course, you know, the Operation Bakken is still there. I think Mali is in a position where it is being pressured to select who to deal with when it comes to its counterinsurgency operations. But this shouldn't be the case. The primary focus should be to stabilize Mali, which has gone through recent, coup d'etats, and the death of its president. So I think it's quite important to really understand that the priority here should be Mali. But with the current interim government of Assimi Goïta, it makes things a lot more difficult. But Malians must rise, and stand by the decision to select whichever partnership it wants to select when it comes to counterinsurgency operations in his country.
All right, David, thank you very much for your insights there. David Otto Endley, Director on Security for the Horn of Africa Institute for Peace and Security Governance based in London. Moving on, a talented South African fashion designer is proving a real inspiration for young people who are feeling discouraged by COVID-19. 26-year-old Ernest Motsi has already showcased at major fashion events, including Paris Fashion Week, a big deal for any designer. But Motsi only discovered his talent and love for fashion a few years ago after his career as a basketball player failed to materialize. In the midst of COVID-19, Motsi earned the title of head designer for Excelsior Luso.
I thought I was going to spend my whole life playing basketball. Unfortunately, that didn't work out because it's not a career in South Africa. And then I didn't know what I was going to do. One day I took my old jacket, I took my mom's fur jacket, I took the fur out and I put it in on my jacket, and the thing just turned out really nice. I came from the Free State 2017 and I was shadowing for like the year. And then the year after that, I got a bursary to study at Lysof. I was really blessed. I was really fortunate to have gotten the opportunities that I got. Lysof, the fashion school, is not affordable. We couldn't afford it. And then a year after that, I got a little internship at a place called Upcycle. So basically, they were using like waste material to remake clothing. And then a year after that, I was at Kateria Atelier as the junior creative director. I think fashion is my ministry. I think it's just my way of living. It's just the way I get through to people, and it's just the way I communicate better with people, I have a better personality through fashion. I just feel like instead of telling someone to be confident, I can use that and they can see themselves as confident,
For me, this collection represents exactly a South African woman, a glamorous woman, and now he's here doing his own thing. For me, that is like really, really incredible.
Being a young black creative in South Africa, the world is looking now, and if you are good at what you do, the world will definitely recognize that.
A lot of me is my mom. Just having picked up the energy and being around her so long and seeing her practice independence and seeing her practice strength. When I think of a woman, I think of she's the perfect example. She's the strong lady. Also going back to our storyline, Excelsior, and her being born in Excelsior. Excelsior was one of the biggest diamonds found in Africa. It was cut into 21 pieces. It was spread around the world. Hence our collection has 21 series. We were really trying to paint this strong woman, this independent woman, this reliable woman. And she's been that for me for the longest run.
And in northern Nigeria, many are marking Christmas while living through anxiety caused by insecurity. Our correspondent Tesem Akende has that report.
68-year-old Rifkatu Zakaria's husband was killed by gunmen 4 months ago. She now lives at this makeshift home in Jos after their house was also destroyed by their attackers.
I miss my husband so much, especially at a time like this. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Christmas was a time for eating a lot of meat because he would always provide. Sadly, we don't have meat this year because he is no more.
Jos City has witnessed a series of outbreaks of communal violence and religious extremism in the last 20 years. In August, armed men attacked and killed 22 commuters in the city. Security analysts want the government to strengthen its security architecture and secure more lives and property.
Government should look inwards. Let's change the perspective. This perspective needs to be changed so that people, lives and property will be secured and people will feel free to do their activities.
The government says it is committed to protecting its citizens. In June this year, the Plateau State government procured and distributed 50 new patrol vehicles and 200 motorcycles to security agencies in the state. It is aimed at boosting the capacity of security agencies towards tackling criminal activities and resurgent attacks on innocent citizens. While the government is finding a lasting solution to the problem, many victims of communal violence like Rifkatu Zakaria hope such efforts will pay off. For now, her heart is heavy, spending Christmas without her husband. Tesem Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
Well, let's check in on the business now. In Tunisia, authorities there have rolled out the draft budget for 2022, which includes measures to combat tax evasion and smuggling. The government aims to raise fuel and electricity prices while freezing public pay in order to keep the fiscal deficit at 7.7%, some 60 basis points lower than 2021's figure. GDP growth in 2022 is forecast to slow down to just 2.6%, even as inflation soars to an average of 7%. Some economists are critical of the spending plan, arguing that the state has opted to raise domestic taxes instead of boosting private investment.
President Kais Saied said that by adopting this bill, the state sends a positive message to the country's economic actors, as well as its international partners and foreign donors. Saied added that the government aims to guarantee the balance of public finances in 2022 and to promote a medium-term economic recovery.
The draft finance law 2022 will ensure the equitable distribution of wealth and combating corruption that undermines public finances and hinders economic growth. The reforms must be carried out according to the will of the people. The decisions relating to public finances must promote the achievement of justice and equity to avoid the negative impact they could have on the poor categories.
The finance minister noted that Tunisia loses 1% equivalent of GDP in tax revenues annually. The country's total annual tax revenue losses amount to $413 million.
Fighting tax evasion as well as smuggling and parallel economy are among the pillars of the new state budget for 2022. This is at the heart of the strategy of the government and the finance ministry for the new year. We have approved many measures to limit tax evasion in Tunisia.
Analysts explain that economic growth is expected to slow down in Tunisia due to the government's decision to raise taxes in 2022, as well as to a resurgence of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The government should not raise taxes to meet expenses. It should rather encourage investment with incentives. Tunisian companies and households have not recovered yet from the repercussions of the health crisis. Raising taxes will deepen the economic and financial crisis and spread social unrest in Tunisia.
Prime Minister Najla Bouden announced that the draft finance law of 2022 provides for an increase in the allowance for poor families. The state will also help SMEs affected by the coronavirus pandemic.
President Saied declared that the reforms planned in the 2022 state budget will make it possible to achieve sustainable economic growth, improve the business climate, while preserving the social role of the state. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And here's what's coming up in the sport. South Africa expects